So this panel is titled Voices, Stories of Resilience, and we thought it was really important. You know, there's many people that have been out there and have been highlighted over the years, but we thought, and we have some of them on the panel too that have spoken before, but we wanted to share the stories of these individuals that have been impacted by 9/11 and other events. We actually have Philippe up here as well. So I'm going to start here. We have Deborah Garcia. Deborah lost her husband, David, and then just recently lost her son, Davin. Next to Deborah is Anne-Marie Principe, and she is a survivor, a 9/11 survivor. And then we have Philippe Vansteenkiste, and Philippe is joined us. He lost his sister in the Brussels airport attack. And then we have Evelyn Tesoriero, but Evelyn is with the FDNY Family Assistance Center. So I thought what we'd start with is them sharing briefly their story. So Deborah, why don't we start with you?
All right. I lost my husband on the 97th floor of Tower 1. He was a contracted computer programmer analyst with Marsh & McLennan. And I live in Vermont, currently living outside the Burlington, Vermont area. I moved there in 2008. I was living in Long Island at the time, and I had two boys, ages 4 and 8 years of age.
That's okay. I believe I'm right.
Okay. Should I pass it on? Or?
Sure.
Okay. I'm Anne-Marie Principe. I'm a 9/11 survivor. I had a small business downtown. I quickly became an activist when everything around us fell apart and the government didn't know how to respond. In addition to that, as we went on, and as you can hear my voice, we all got very sick. I burned out my vocal cords. I've gone through breast cancer, a brain tumor, and most recently a mini stroke. And I have found that by working with Mary and people like Dr. Starr, I have found my way back.
Thank you. Philippe.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Yes, so I lost my sister during the 22nd March attacks 2016 in Brussels. At that moment, I was in Belgium. And yes, of course, your life is suddenly shaken. Your path to the future is also changes, of course. I was very active business-wise in the international world, and realizing suddenly that my sister was also my best friend and always took care of my parents while I was abroad, was gone. And my first intention was, now I have to take care of my parents. And so I was somewhere obliged to say in Belgium. We couldn't comprehend what was going on. We couldn't put words on our feelings. And we received some help, but at that moment in a tunnel vision, you don't realize, or it's not the help that you need, in fact. So it just passes by. And then the months are passing by, and you just start to wonder what's going on. Where's my position in this world? Where is recognition? How are we going to go further? And I was looking for meeting other victims to be able to share my concerns, my questions, to see how they were doing. And it was just impossible to meet other victims in Belgium because they all want to protect us. So finally, I took contact with the victims from the Paris attacks in France, because they're an association. And when I met them, it was just incredible. I met a family without having to express yourself. The people understood you. And I said, this is just, yeah, that's what we need. Feeling that you're not alone, that we can help each other. And that's why I decided to create an association in Belgium to help, first of all, that the victims can come together, they can meet, they can share their experiences. And we realized that we all had the same concerns, and the main one was the lack of dignity. And from there on, we moved forward to express to the government and everyone who should take charge of us that we had these concerns. And from there on, step by step, we then saw that we have to build something, but to build something, they have to understand our needs properly. And we started to work on providing a better service for the victims of terrorism. Of course, it takes a long time. Building something up means that you have to trust your partner, that you have to understand the partners. And of course, there's a whole legal and society frame. The reality of life is there. And today, we have FI Europe, the association, still working very hard. We took a little bit the expertise from Spain, which is trying to focus on 4 pillars, which is dignity, meaning everything should be happening the way that the victims are not re-victimized, that they are treated with dignity. Next to it is a memory, of course. We should never forget and we should learn. Then there is also, the third one is justice. Justice should be done. And the fourth one is also truth. Many victims need to know the truth, to understand why it happened to them. So this is in a very nutshell where we stand.
Thank you, Philippe. Evelyn.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Evelyn Tesoriero. I'm the Assistant Commissioner in the Family Assistance Unit in the Fire Department. I've been with the department 40 years, and on 9/11, I worked in the Commissioner's office at the time. And immediately the Commissioner realized, and the executive staff realized that we needed a centralized office where our families could get information. Early on, as we all know, information was slow, and we were devastated. We had never had a loss of life of 343 first responders. So family assistance was created, and I was one of the first people in the unit, along with a fire officer. The unit has expanded. We are 12 people, and it consists of civilians and uniformed members. And we're still servicing our 9/11 families and all those that have become ill due to 9/11 illnesses. So we provide information. We sit down for funeral planning. We give them pension information, scholarship information, anything that they need. We are a resource unit. So we provide a service that is very much needed, and that is very much welcome amongst the families and our members. I'm proud to be part of that unit. I grew up in the fire department. I was very, very young when I first started, and this has been the best, most rewarding, saddest, and most satisfying unit that I have ever worked in. And I am very proud of the work we do for our members and their families in our counseling, along with counseling service unit, along with the health, the medical program that we have. Dr. Prasad, who maybe you may know, Mary, but he does an excellent job on keeping us all informed and our members and tracking their health on a yearly basis. So thank you for having us here today.
Hello? Okay. So that day was to be a transition in my career as a speech and language pathologist. And my husband had shifted his work week because he worked 2 days in Midtown and 3 days downtown for 2 different companies, for GHI and Marsh & McLennan. And our babysitter wasn't around. So he agreed to stay home with the kids that day. And then the sitter called a night or two before and said, "Oh, I got your message." And so we agreed to switch to have her come and stay home. And my husband went into work that day. It was the second day of third grade for my 8-year-old, and it was the first day of pre-K for my 4-year-old. And I had just put him on the bus and looked at my watch, and it was about 8:37 when I looked at my watch. And we always communicated with each other. David was legally blind, and so we always moved in a foursome, and he would always check in when he got into work around 9 o'clock, and then we check in at noon, and then we check in later on the day, and he'd tell me what train he was on. And I looked at my watch, and I was feeling a little solemn that I put my baby on the bus, and I wanted to share it with him. And I said, no, I'm going to wait till he gets to his office. I'm not going to make him stop before he gets, in the lobby or before he goes inside the building, and delay whatever he was going to do. I knew he was supposed to run errands that morning and mail a disability policy. And I went back into the house, and Sesame Street was on, and I was looking at real estate ads because we were ready to move out of our starter home, and we had saved furiously for the past several years, especially thinking that David would retire early. He was 40 years old, and that he was planning to retire at 50 because of his eye disease that was progressive. And then I looked up because I didn't hear Big Bird singing anymore, and I saw a tower burning, and I didn't really know how to process that. I didn't believe he was there yet. He had only left the house at 7:12. And I thought, just like other people had said, that it was a little Cessna that had hit the building. And I tried to call him, and I didn't get an answer. The phone on his desk was ringing. And I thought, okay. And then I watched as the second plane banked around on live broadcast and sliced through the second tower. And that was shocking. And I continued to try to call him. Then you hear reports of more planes being hijacked. And I really thought my life was coming to an end. I thought we were all going to die at the same time, together, but separate, because both of my children were on school buses going in different directions. And I knew that I couldn't get in a car and drive. So that was my immediate experience for that day. And after that, it was gathering evidence in a Ziploc bag, toothbrush, razor. I said, I know how to search for a body with a razor and a toothbrush. And a family member went into Manhattan the next day and stood on a line outside the Langone Center and handed them the bag. They handed him a P number, and he came home with a list of phone numbers for hospitals, and there was nobody in the hospitals. I could hear helicopters flying overnight. It was really chaotic. I was also dealing with the shock that my children, especially my 8-year-old, was experiencing, who had disappeared actually at one point the second day. And then just trying to figure out what to do, because it turned into a search for a missing person. And we had triage in the house, and we're making posters, missing persons posters, and going to Manhattan, and we're posting them up on chain link fences and walls, and we have to go to a crisis center. And Marsh was there. They had a big setup. They had his name on a list. New York Crime Victims Board was there. They handed me a check. Red Cross was there. And then it was just going home and just waiting. I had to actively seek out information about what I'm supposed to do, about what is going on down with the rescue efforts. So in the first months, I was inundated with collective empathy. People were sending things to my home, food, flowers, money. It was a cacophony. And my sister had moved in with me for a few weeks at that time. Then all the demands came and the list making came. And I was checking items off my to-do list. In addition to all of the typical things that you do with the business of death, I had to fill out uncountable applications, and I had to pursue those things in order to access information, in order to receive aid, I had to prove that my husband had not run off and didn't have another family in Mexico, because his last name is Garcia. I suddenly had lawyers. I had workers' comp lawyers, which I did not receive workers' comp. And I had to prove that my husband was a dedicated employee and was under the direction and control of Marsha McLennan, which I was not successful at, but that's okay. And of course, the Victims' Compensation Fund, which was very confusing and intense. And I had to go through a hearing. I had to prove my husband's worth. They plugged his babysitting, the hours that he babysat his own children, into a formula and came up with a ridiculous number. Then I had to get another attorney and have a hearing. And we all know what that was like. So it was months. It was a good solid 18 months of getting about 4 to 6 hours of sleep at night and checking off all the things on my list that I felt I needed to do in order to be able to have continuity. And one of the things that did come up in email, and email was really young in those days, and I was not very computer savvy, was the emails coming from the group that Mary Fetchit had started in Connecticut. And also the South Nassau County's Hospital in Long Island had opened up a community 9/11 counseling center in a storefront in Rockville Center. And we began going there in February. But then again, it was a neighbor that told me about that. I just wasn't getting information. Once I found Mary's website, or they would send out newsletters with information that was valuable for the families, phone numbers for services, for groups, for events that were going on. And there were so many events, so many things that I just couldn't be involved in because I was just trying to stay alive and to keep my children alive. But the lists continue into today. I'm still fighting. I'm still fighting for funds that were allocated and are being held up in bureaucratic jurisdictions because I didn't have a will when I was 37 years old. I've been punished for 21 years for not having a will when I was 37 years old. And also fighting for appropriate mental health care and access to mental health care.
Thank you, Deborah. Anne Marie, I wondered if we could turn to you as a survivor. You had some of the same challenges in getting the World Trade Center Health Program. Maybe you could speak briefly so we can
Certainly.
have,
I was unfortunately, in the street when the towers came down. I had a small business. I couldn't run my business. None of us could. We didn't know what to do. As Deborah said, the way to get help was through forums, and it was tedious and overwhelming when you were already traumatized. And so I got together with a group of people who had small businesses. We were all getting sick at the time. And this was our salvation, that group, a peer group support. And we worked together, we worked through the forums, we worked through the government, and it sustained us through all of that trauma, through all of those tribulations. And to this day, I believe that peer group support, leaning on one another, is one of the greatest assets that we have. In addition, I did lobby for the beginning, not only for access for the small businesses and for help, but because we were getting sick. We had no idea how sick we were going to get. And eventually we had some great champions in Congress, including Carolyn Maloney and Jerry Nadler, who stuck their necks out for us when it wasn't a popular cause and saw it through for over a decade until we got what we needed. And you talk about resilience and power. It took a lot for them to do that for us. We're eternally grateful to them. And the program does have its issues and challenges, but it's there and it can be fixed, just like we've all been able to fix ourselves. And I have hope that with groups like these and groups of survivors and responders, we will be successful.
Thank you. Now, we talked, I think you had a really good picture of what it's been like, you know, for a family member and a responder. And I wondered, Fred, you made the choice to leave and go to Hawaii, which sounds very appealing right now. But I wondered, you know, Philippe and Evelyn, if you could talk about some of the challenges that you found in the immediate aftermath. Philippe?
Yes, well, for me it was, I tried to focus on the other family members, so I probably didn't really focus on myself, because you don't have that much energy. When you concentrate or you work 5 minutes or 15 minutes, you already feel exhausted. But still you have to keep going on. So at the end you feel extremely lonely, not understood. And even though that people come with empathy, you know that in the deep side you can't share, and they don't understand really what's going on. So even whatever the signs they show, you remain on your own. Also, this dignity, as I said earlier, is so important. And when people start to have pity with you, well, that was really a very annoying feeling for me, because we didn't do anything wrong. My sister was killed by terrorists. We didn't do anything wrong. Yeah, I wanted to keep some proudness. We have built a big part of our life, and that proudness should be there. So for me it was really loneliness, and it took time, probably a lot of energy to accept that in fact no one can help you. You can only help yourself. And that's the reality. And what the others can do is to provide you a surrounding that allows you to take care of yourself. And we are all human beings. We are all luckily totally different. That's what makes so interesting also. But the needs, the moments of the needs are different for everyone. And I always say it's like you have your intimate book of life. You write your book of life, and suddenly there is a chapter that comes there that you don't want to read. You can't read it. And you try to skip that chapter, to skip it. And then you try to pick up the next chapter. And sometimes you can go far in the book, but at a certain moment you have to go back to that horrible chapter to understand what's following. And that's a task we all have to do, I think.
Evelyn?
For me, the uncertainty of the first, couple of weeks for our families, not knowing if their loved one was alive. There was a huge hope in the beginning that there were pockets of air underground, that maybe people were there and they were able to survive. And the question was, well, how long can you survive without food and water and all of that? Personally, that morning, I felt there was so much hatred and ugliness in the world. But by the afternoon, the people reaching out to us from all over the world, all the states in the United States, I went to bed that night, knowing that we had a tremendous loss, not knowing exactly the numbers we lost, but thinking there is good in the world. People are reaching out to us. What do you need? The money started to come in and all sorts of things, and assistance from fire departments from Chicago, from San Francisco. And it turned really quickly, the ugliness I saw, to people wanting to help us. And to the ladies here to my right, I feel for you that you didn't have direction, where with our department, we knew right away we needed to provide these families that were helpless and couldn't understand. Some of the wives explain, I never paid a bill. My husband used to pay all the bills, and what do I do? And also amongst themselves, the peer groups were huge. There was a parent group that was created. There was the spouses group, the chiefs groups. There were groups from Long Island. There were groups from upstate. So that helped them tremendously, because they can get together and, are you going through this? What do we need to do? Who do we need to reach out to? And there were, just in our department, there were 800 children left without a dad. We lost only males that day. And, these children needed counseling. So our counseling service unit, which was a very, very small unit, because first responders do not like to ask for help. They are the helpers. They do not like to open up about what is going on. They realized early on we needed to expand mental health, and we're still expanding the mental health field, because 21 years later, children that were little or weren't born yet now, need the assistance. And we're not perfect, but we did learn a lot of valuable lessons because of 9/11, and a lot of good things came out of 9/11, and a lot of family members created foundations in their loved one's name and have continued to pay it forward. And every day I am amazed at their resiliency. Resiliency is the word. It's amazing how they continue getting up every day and moving forward. They had still children to put on school buses. They had to feed their children. They had to, if you collapsed and didn't get up, your whole family would collapse. So resiliency is the word.
Well, I think a couple of points that came up that I think are really important. Philippe, you brought up that, it's really our responsibility. Only we can do for ourselves. And also the theme about how different it is for every person, that you go through, everybody goes through grief differently or trauma differently, but you have to work through it. You can't skip over that chapter. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that I'm seeing on the panel too is that, Evelyn, you had a structure, right? So it was great that you could immediately set up something for the fire department. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think Deborah and Anne Marie. So I'm just wondering, we don't have a lot of time left, but I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to talk about how were you able to build that structure and what helped you move forward, because you're obviously resilient, even to get up and tell your story here today, which is, I think, very compelling for the audience. So, Deborah, I know one thing that you do that keeps you resilient.
Yes, well, in the early days, even though my husband wasn't present, his love was present. I couldn't just turn off a switch and not be in love. And I started writing to him. I started writing in journals on the computer and in a book. And I never went back fully to work as a speech and language therapist, but I slowly developed myself and my healing through my writing. And so now I write poetry and memoir, and I have a website that I post my things on. That's been a large part of my healing, and I think it's helped my son, my surviving son. Unfortunately, in 2020, I lost my 27-year-old son to suicide. So in my life, 9/11 has been a continuous discontinuity. And with all of the legal issues, it feels like the ceaseless death. It really feels like the ceaseless death. But I find, I recalibrate myself through meditation, through yoga, and through support groups that I've been sharing my story with groups with voices for the family support groups, and I also belong to the support group for the families who have lost someone in the past 3 years. And it's not only been beneficial for me to share my story, but it's also really kind of invigorating for me to know that other people appreciate my sharing my story with me. And when I hear back from them that the things that I've said and shared are helping them, especially the newer widows that are coming into the group who have just recently lost a family member, usually to the cancers, or a spouse from the cancers, and they're starting this process from scratch. Of course, they have a lot more support networks than I had at the time. So for me, I find my healing through writing and through community and sharing my stories.
And Deborah's, the two groups that she was referring to, I think I can disclose, when she's on the call, you see these volumes of, she's been writing for 21 years, so she has a lot of writing, but she's a fabulous writer, and I think you have some things on your website, poems and things like that.
Yes.
What is your website, Deborah?
WorldTradeWidow.com.
Yeah, so
really
if you want to take a look, she's written some beautiful things.
Thank you. Now, also, I wanted to say that I'm a list maker, and I have saved all of the mailings and information in regards to the litigations, in regards to all of the memorials and things that I did, and they slate a wall in my office, 5-inch binders of all of the business of 9/11 that I personally have addressed in the past 21 years.
I remember early on we had, an organizational workshop, and people would bring in huge containers of all of the notes and forms and things. It was so confusing, so I can appreciate that you have it organized. Anne Marie?
Sure. Well, for me, small businesses and residents really didn't have any kind of support. And all I kept hearing is somebody needs to do something. And I thought, well, I'm somebody. And so we organized a small business lobby that proved to be very successful. Along the way, we got sick and decided to form another group to help us to get health care, which proved to be a long-term battle. But I have found that by having peer group support, people who were either the small businesses or survivors or the first responders, all of those people understood my isolation and my feeling of not being connected to anyone else. We were very connected through something terrible but very strong that unites us in a very unique way. And I have found that we can sit together and not say a word to one another with peace, just knowing you're with someone who completely gets you. And I found that by doing this work, it's not that I don't have dark or terrible times. Certainly I have those. But there's a part of me that always seems to kick in at the worst possible time that says, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to get up one more time. And that one more time always seems to come and to be able to help me to empower someone else. And one of my favorite quotes is from Shawshank Redemption, where he talks about hope. And he says, it's a good thing. It's the best of things. And no good thing ever dies.
And I know I was in Washington with Anne Marie and the responders, and it was really remarkable to see the strength that they had. Some were in wheelchairs, others had oxygen tanks, and they were traveling back and forth to Washington to lobby for the creation of something that should have been put in place immediately, the World Trade Center Health Program. And it's really because of their efforts that it exists today, and thousands are benefiting from it. Philippe, how about you?
Yes, well, I think resilience is probably a lifetime job for the rest of our life, because every day is different. So from my side, I always try to think, we are now victims, how can we go forward? And to put it very bluntly, we should have the possibility to try to rebuild this as good as possible, to become proud citizens again of our society and of our world. Meaning that we can leave this victim's position or become really a survivor. But this should be possible for everyone. And I realized when we were trying to bring forward all the issues we were having with the authorities and the system, it's not about bad will. They would like to help us, but in fact, they don't understand us. And so I think we just talk the same vocabulary, but with different meanings. And probably because we as victims and survivors, the intensity is so big, the other people have difficulties listening to us because it's too harmful for them. And so what I try now to do is to change the emotions from the victims, but without discrimination at everyone, because everyone again has different needs and urgencies, to try to, as good as possible, change these emotions into a rational way of talking, so that the people who could help us finally start to understand what it is about, and it's a long and difficult mission.
And Philippe, you bring up a good point, because I think immediately after we have friends, families, strangers, organizations coming forward to help, but then there's a shift. And I think some of the things that we went through, like the notification of remains, it's not anything that you want to share with your dear friend. And so there is a comfort level of really talking with somebody else that understands it without having to explain it. And, we've found the support group. I mean, even this year we have a survivor support group. Many of the people that are in the group had never talked to another survivor before in 20 years. So I think it gives people an opportunity to meet people, and they're immediately on the same page. So I'm going to turn to you, Evelyn.
So in the fire department, we created right away a family advisory board, and it was a group of spouses and parents. And in the beginning, we would meet twice a month. They would come into headquarters and they would sit at the conference room table and go over some of the many issues, because though the department was providing information and assistance, they still had the same questions that civilian families had, and they still had to go through the process of bringing toothbrushes and the information on their loved ones, because they were in the beginning they were missing. And sitting through those, I did not lose a family member that day, but I lost many friends that had worked with for years. They left headquarters that morning and they were killed. And sitting through those meetings and listening to them, and you're right, that group didn't have to really explain anything. They all knew exactly how they felt without even having to say much. But sitting, and we did that for years. We met with the Family Advisory Board, and they would bring us their questions, concerns, and then we would act on getting them information. So we were the go-between the commissioner and the families, and it helped them. And then it became a group for them just to meet, because at some point, most of the issues, that they had, victims' compensation fund or mental health for their children and scholarships, they were okay. They were they were all moving forward with that. But it became a group that they enjoyed meeting, and they helped us to understand what was going on in their community. So we helped them, but they helped us much more to understand what family members were going through on a daily basis, and they still go through. I think that forever they will live with their loss and their tragedy.
And we talked yesterday about the circle of impact, and we've heard from victims' families, but I think you can't shortchange the loss that you suffered. Mm-hmm. So I think the providers often come forward because they have a connection also, and you can understand, but oftentimes that gets overlooked, and I think it's really important to recognize the broader community, including the responders and survivors that have been impacted. Well, let's give a round of applause to this fabulous panel.